The white envelope sat on my desk, positioned right next to the brass nameplate that read Peter Blake, Director of Operations. Hillary Vance from Human Resources didn't even offer me a seat. She leaned against the doorframe of my corner office, arms crossed, tapping an acrylic fingernail against her elbow. "Sign the acknowledgement form, Peter," Hillary said. "We need your keycards, company laptop, and building pass on my desk before 12. I didn't pick up the pen. "Is this a joke, Hillary? I closed the Riverfront acquisition on Tuesday. The board just cleared $40 million in profit because of my team. And as of 9 this morning, the board made structural adjustments," she replied, her voice completely devoid of emotion. Evelyn took over as sole CEO yesterday. Her first official act was a top-to-bottom audit of the leadership team. "You're being let go." "Let go," I repeated. "I spent 7 years building Sterling Group from a failing regional firm into a top-tier market player. And the company appreciates your service," she said flatly, sliding a single piece of paper toward me. "Standard severance. 3 months base pay. You have 20 minutes to pack your personal belongings." I stood up, took the termination letter, and walked straight out of my office toward the executive suite. The floor was unnaturally quiet. Dozens of employees, people I had hired, trained, and promoted, suddenly found intense interest in their monitors. Nobody made eye contact with me. When I pushed open the double glass doors of the CEO's suite, Evelyn was sitting behind the massive walnut desk that used to belong to her father. Standing right beside her, leaning over her shoulder to point at an iPad screen, was Julian Vance, Hillary's cousin and Evelyn's newly appointed senior strategic advisor. Evelyn didn't look up immediately. She signed a document, handed it to Julian, and finally set her pen down. "You shouldn't have come up here, Peter," she said, her voice cool and perfectly composed. "You fired me through HR?" I asked, dropping the termination letter onto her desk. 2 days after you took the CEO's seat, you cut me out?" Julian stepped forward, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit with a smirk. "Let's keep this professional, Peter. The company is pivoting toward international venture markets. Your background is local operations. Frankly, your skill set is obsolete for where Evelyn is taking Sterling Group." "I wasn't talking to you, Julian," I said calmly, keeping my eyes fixed on my wife. "Evelyn, is this how we're doing this?" Evelyn leaned back in her leather chair and crossed her hands. "It's not personal, Peter. It's business. Sterling Group needs a fresh image. Having my husband run operations creates a clear conflict of interest with our new institutional investors. They want a world-class executive team, not family favoritism." "Family favoritism?" I let out a dry laugh. "When your father had his stroke 3 years ago, who renegotiated the firm's debt with the banks? Who slept on the couch in this office for 6 months to save this company from liquidation? And you were compensated for your work," Evelyn replied without flinching. "You got a title, a salary, and a comfortable lifestyle. But Sterling has outgrown you. If you really care about me and this company's future, you'll step down gracefully without making a scene." Julian chuckled softly. "Look on the bright side, man. You can finally take that vacation you're always talking about. Stay at home, relax. Let the real executives handle the heavy lifting." I looked at Julian, then back at Evelyn. There was no warmth in her eyes, only cold ambition and a quiet, condescending pity. She genuinely believed that without her name and her family's company, I was nothing. She had completely forgotten who actually pulled the strings behind every major deal Sterling Group had ever closed. "All right," I said. Evelyn blinked, surprised by how fast I dropped it. "All right. If that's your final decision, I accept it," I said. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out my private cell phone, a black, unlisted device I almost never used in front of her. I bypassed my contacts, dialed a 10-digit domestic number from memory, and hit speakerphone. The line rang twice before a booming voice answered. "Peter? Is that you?" The voice belonged to Marcus Thorne, CEO of Thorne Capital and Rival Corp, the undisputed juggernaut of the financial sector and Sterling Group's deadliest competitor. Evelyn's eyes narrowed instantly. She recognized the voice. "It's me, Marcus," I said clearly. "I hope you're calling to tell me you finally got tired of playing local games." Marcus laughed over the speaker. "My offer from last month is still on the table. 12.5 million base, 3% founder equity in Rival Corp, and complete authority over our North American acquisitions." Julian's arrogant smile vanished instantly. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I'm available immediately, I said into the phone. Send the contract to my private email. I'll sign it before lunch. Outstanding, Marcus shouted. My driver is already in your area. I'll see you at headquarters at 2 o'clock, Chief Operating Officer. See you at 2, I said and hung up. The executive office fell into a dead silence. Evelyn stood up from her chair so fast her leather seat rolled back into the glass wall behind her. What was that? She demanded, her voice losing its icy calm for the first time. Are you out of your mind, Peter? You're calling Marcus Thorne from my office. I don't work for you anymore, Evelyn, I said, putting my phone back in my pocket. My time is my own. You signed a non-compete clause when you joined Sterling. Julian snapped, stepping up beside Evelyn, his face flushed red. You can't go to Rival Corp. We will sue you for every dime you have before you even sit in Thorne's office. I walked over to the desk, picked up my termination letter, and neatly folded it in half. Read paragraph 4 of my original contract, Julian, I said, glancing at him with a deadpan expression. The non-compete clause only applies if I resign voluntarily or get terminated for gross misconduct. Evelyn just signed a standard no-cause severance. Julian froze, looking over at Evelyn in panic. Evelyn immediately grabbed the file on her desk and flipped through the pages with trembling fingers. You knew, Evelyn whispered, staring up at me in shock. You structured your contract like this from day one? I prepared for every scenario, Evelyn, I said, stepping back toward the glass doors. Just like I prepared every success this company ever had. Peter, wait, she shouted, taking a step around her desk. We need to talk about this. We're done talking, I said calmly. Good luck with your restructuring. I walked out of the suite, down the hallway, and directly into the elevator. When the doors opened in the main lobby, I walked past the security desk without looking back. As I stepped through the revolving glass doors onto the bustling city street, a matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up directly to the curb. A silver-haired man in a crisp suit stepped out from the rear passenger door, immediately bowed his head, and opened the door for me. Welcome back, Mr. Blake, the man said quietly. The board of the Blake Global Syndicate has been informed that your 7-year trial period with the Vance family has officially concluded. All global accounts have been restored to your name. Thank you, Thomas, I said, stepping into the back seat. Let's go to Rival Corp first. I have a company to buy. The glass doors of Rival Corp's top-floor executive suite swung open as Marcus Thorne stepped out to greet me. He didn't offer a hand. He gave me a brief, sharp nod that signaled business. Your desk is ready, Peter, Marcus said, gesturing toward a corner office overlooking the financial district. And your team is already assembled. Chloe Palmer is waiting inside. Chloe stood up from a glass conference table as I walked in. She was 28, sharp as a tack, and had spent 4 years as my top analyst at Sterling before I quietly recommended her for a VP spot at Rival 3 months ago. Welcome aboard, boss, Chloe said, sliding an iPad across the table. I've already pulled the file on Sterling's riverfront commercial complex. Evelyn and Julian called an emergency board meeting 40 minutes ago to announce your departure. How did they spin it? I asked, sitting down. Julian told the board you were burnt out and stepped down voluntarily, Chloe said, a smirk pulling at her lips. Then he took full credit for the riverfront contract, claiming he negotiated the final terms. Marcus chuckled, leaning against the doorframe with a mug of black coffee. The idiot just walked into a buzzsaw. He doesn't know about the secondary financing rights, does he? Not a chance, I said. He thinks Riverfront is fully funded by City National. He doesn't realize City National sold 70% of the debt tranche to a private syndicate last night. Your syndicate, Chloe added. Before I could answer, my personal phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID showed Sterling Group's main corporate line. I clicked speaker. Peter, Evelyn's voice came through, sharp and tight with authority. You need to come back to the office right now. I'm a little busy, Evelyn, I said flatly. What do you want? Don't play games with me, she demanded. Julian just reviewed the Riverfront file. The master development agreement is missing the secondary lender sign-offs. Where are the original executed documents? In my head, I replied, along with the rest of the strategy you fired me for. Listen to me very carefully, Evelyn said, her tone dropping into a icy, legalistic threat. You were an officer of this company until 9 o'clock this morning. Hiding, withholding, or tampering with corporate documents is a direct violation of your fiduciary duty. Our chief legal counsel is standing right here. If those files aren't delivered to my office in 1 hour, we are filing an emergency injunction and initiating criminal fraud charges. I looked across the table at Chloe, who was silently holding up a red folder. Evelyn, I said slowly into the mic, your chief legal counsel is an idiot. I didn't hide anything. City National pulled their funding 30 minutes after my termination was processed in your HR system. Silence hung on the line for 3 full seconds. What are you talking about? Evelyn's voice cracked slightly. City National signed the primary commitment letter 2 weeks ago. Read page 42 of the commitment letter, Evelyn, I said. Clause 14b. The funding was contingent on my direct oversight as Director of Operations. When Hillary processed my termination, City National's risk compliance automatically flagged the deal and canceled the loan. I could hear frantic paper rustling on her end, followed by Julian's muffled voice yelling at someone in the background. That's impossible, Evelyn whispered, her composure slipping further. That clause shouldn't exist. It exists because I put it there, I said. I built this company to protect you from your own incompetence, Evelyn. But now you're running the show. So go fix it. Peter, stop this. She shouted. You can't do this to Sterling. You're my husband. I was your husband, I corrected her. Now I'm the chief operating officer of Rival Corporation. And as my first official act, Rival is making a formal tender offer to buy the Riverfront debt tranche at a 50% discount. You wouldn't dare, she gasped. Watch me, I said, and ended the call. Marcus walked over and tapped the table. She's going to come here in person. You know how she operates. She thinks she can talk you down. Let her come, I said. Chloe, set up a meeting with the City Planning Board for 3 o'clock. We're rezoning the riverfront perimeter for commercial high density. If Sterling wants to build their shopping center, they'll have to buy the access roads from us. On it, Chloe said, instantly typing on her laptop. Less than 40 minutes later, my assistant knocked on the glass door. Mr. Blake, Mrs. Blake is in the lobby. She's demanding to see you, and she brought Julian Vance and 2 private security guards. Send them up, I said. When the elevator doors hissed open, Evelyn marched into my office like she owned the floor. Julian followed right behind her, holding a thick leather briefcase, his expression a mix of rage and desperation. Out, Evelyn barked at Chloe without even looking at her. Peter, and I need to talk privately. Chloe didn't move. She looked at me, waited for my subtle nod, and then casually stepped toward the door. You've gone too far, Peter, Evelyn said, stepping right up to my desk and slamming her hands on the polished wood. Calling in favors from competitors? Blocking our debt financing? Is this your idea of revenge because I let you go? It's not revenge, Evelyn. It's market competition, I said, leaning back in my leather chair. You told me this morning that my skills were obsolete. I'm just proving how much those obsolete skills were costing you. Julian stepped up, pointing a finger at my face. You manipulated those contracts, Blake. You deliberately set up poison pills in Sterling's operations to sabotage Evelyn the second you got fired. We're filing for a temporary restraining order and reporting you to the SEC. I didn't even blink. I just looked at Julian's trembling hand. Julian, I said quietly, if you point that finger at me again, I'll have security throw you out of the building by your collar. You don't intimidate me. Julian snapped, though he pulled his hand back an inch. You're nothing without the Blake family name and Evelyn's father's legacy. You were a glorified manager. The door to my office opened again. Marcus Thorne walked in, holding a single black folder. Beside him walked 3 senior executives from Rival Corp, all of them veterans of the financial market. Julian immediately changed his tone, turning to Marcus with a tight, professional smile. Mr. Thorne, I'm glad you're here. You need to know that Peter is exposing Rival Corp to massive legal liability by using proprietary Sterling data. Marcus didn't even look at Julian. He walked straight past him, stopped next to my chair, and handed me the black folder with both hands. The board just ratified the acquisition, Peter, Marcus said out loud, his voice ringing clearly across the room. You now have total authority over Rival's entire $12 billion North American portfolio. Whatever you decide to do with Sterling Group's debt, the firm stands behind you 100%. Evelyn froze. She stared at Marcus, then looked back at me, her eyes wide with total confusion. Mr. Thorne, Evelyn started, her voice faltering. You're giving him total authority? He's only been here for 2 hours. Marcus turned his head slightly to look at Evelyn. Mrs. Blake, Peter didn't join Rival Corp as an employee today. He joined as a principal partner. He has been our chief external strategic advisor for 5 years. Half the deals that built this firm came from his desk. Evelyn's face drained of all color. What? Did you really think your father built Sterling's international supply chain on his own? Marcus let out a short, cold laugh. Your father was a visionary, Mrs. Blake, but Peter was the mastermind. You didn't fire a manager this morning. You threw away the architect of your entire company. Julian stood there, his mouth open, looking between Marcus and me as if his entire worldview had just collapsed. Evelyn took a step back, clutching her handbag tightly against her chest. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. The quiet man who cooked her dinner, who stayed up late reviewing her speeches, who always sat in the back row during shareholder meetings. He was standing at the very top of the financial food chain. Peter, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because you never asked, I said smoothly. You were too busy looking down on me. I opened the black folder, signed my name at the bottom of the first document, and closed it. Chloe, I called out. Chloe stepped back into the office. Yes, boss. Execute the purchase of Sterling's riverfront debt, I commanded, and notify their legal team that we're calling in the full principal balance of $65 million. They have 48 hours to pay in full, or we initiate foreclosure on Sterling Group's headquarters. Evelyn gasped, dropping her handbag onto the floor. Peter, that building is my father's legacy. You can't take headquarters. I picked up my pen, looked her dead in the eye, and said, 47 hours and 59 minutes, Evelyn. You better get to work. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis was packed with Manhattan's corporate elite. Crystal chandeliers threw sharp light across rows of tuxedo-clad CEOs and high-society investors. It was the annual Wall Street Leadership Gala, the single event where billion-dollar liquidity deals were closed over champagne. Evelyn walked through the heavy double doors, holding her head high, though her hands trembled slightly against her clutch. Julian followed a half-step behind her, nervously readjusting his bow tie every few seconds. Are you sure Lord Harrington is here? Evelyn asked under her breath, scanning the VIP mezzanine. If we don't secure his private equity fund to refinance the riverfront debt by midnight, the bank freezes our operating accounts tomorrow morning. His chief of staff confirmed it, Julian muttered, wiping a thin sheen of sweat from his forehead. Harrington's sovereign fund controls $80 billion. A $65 million loan is pocket change to him. We just need 5 minutes in the VIP lounge. They marched directly toward the velvet ropes leading up to the glass staircase. 2 towering security guards stepped forward, blocking the path with raised palms. Invitations for the Grand Sovereign Suite. Please, the head guard said flatly. Evelyn pulled out her black embossed pass. Evelyn Blake, CEO of Sterling Group. I have a scheduled introduction with Lord Harrington. The guard scanned the barcode on his handheld device. A sharp red beep echoed. I'm sorry, Ms. Blake, the guard said without a change in expression. This pass is restricted to Tier 3 access. The upper mezzanine is reserved exclusively for primary partners of the Blake Global Syndicate and their guests. Evelyn frowned. The Blake Syndicate? There must be a mistake. Sterling Group has been a key sponsor of this gala for 5 years. No mistake, ma'am, the guard replied coldly. Orders came directly from the chairman's office 10 minutes ago. No unapproved corporate entities. Julian stepped up, pointing an aggressive finger at the guard's chest. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? She is Arthur Blake's daughter. Her family built half the commercial real estate in this city. Call your supervisor right now. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Julian, a calm, familiar voice called out from behind them. Evelyn turned around instantly. I was walking across the marble floor, flanked by Chloe and 2 senior partners from Wall Street's premier investment banks. I wore a tailored midnight blue tuxedo, completely unbothered by the chaos surrounding Sterling Group. Peter, Evelyn said, her voice dropping an octave as she took in my appearance. What are you doing here? How did you even get past security? I don't need a pass to enter my own gala. Evelyn, I said smoothly, stopping 2 feet away from her. Julian let out a loud, mocking laugh, looking around as if waiting for the surrounding crowd to join in. Your gala? Listen to yourself, Blake. You're an executive employee at Rival Corp now. Stop pretending you own the city just because Marcus Thorne gave you a title. Before I could answer, the glass doors at the top of the VIP staircase clicked open. Lord Harrington himself, a legendary 70-year-old British financier whose private equity network dictated global energy markets, walked down the stairs. Beside him was Marcus Thorne, alongside four international ambassadors. Julian's eyes lit up. He brushed past me, extending a hand out toward Harrington with a wide, practiced smile. Lord Harrington, what an honor, sir. I am Julian Vance, Chief Strategic Officer of Sterling Group, and this is our CEO, Evelyn Blake. We spoke with your secretary regarding the Riverfront Bridge loan. Lord Harrington didn't even slow his pace. He walked right past Julian's outstretched hand, as if the man were completely invisible. The crowd held its breath as Harrington walked straight up to me, stopped, and bowed his head in deep respect. Mr. Blake, Lord Harrington said, his crisp English accent carrying across the silent ballroom. We've been waiting for you upstairs. The syndicate members from Zurich and Tokyo have just joined the secure line. Evelyn's face drained of all color. She stared at Harrington, then at me, her lips parting in utter shock. Lord Harrington, Evelyn stammered, stepping forward. I don't understand. Mr. Blake is my ex-husband and a former manager at my firm. Why are you reporting to him? Harrington turned slowly, looking at Evelyn with cold, unblinking eyes. Ex-husband? Ms. Blake, you are standing in front of the founder and majority shareholder of the Blake Global Syndicate. Mr. Peter Blake controls 60% of the capital flow in this room. If he decides your firm closes tonight, it closes. A heavy silence fell over the surrounding crowd. Whispers erupted across the ballroom floor like wildfire. Founder? Julian's voice cracked violently. No, that's impossible. Sterling Group provided all his income. He lived in her house. He drove her father's cars. My father's cars. I looked at Julian with a faint, deadpan smile. Julian, the house Evelyn lives in was purchased by my offshore trust 5 years ago. Sterling Group's primary operating capital was funneled through my private accounts when her father almost went bankrupt in 2021. I turned my attention back to Evelyn. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying mix of disbelief, humiliation, and realization. You, Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling as tears welled in her eyes. You ran everything from behind the scenes? Every single investor my father introduced me to, every major line of credit. They weren't looking at your father, Evelyn, I said, my tone crisp and devoid of any sentiment. They were looking at me. I spent 7 years standing in your shadow, so you could play the brilliant young CEO. But you mistook my humility for weakness. Peter. She took a desperate step closer, reaching out to grab my sleeve. Peter, please. We can fix this. Come upstairs with me. Let's talk about this like husband and wife. We are no longer husband and wife, I said, stepping back so her hand caught empty air. You made that choice at 9 o'clock this morning when you handed me a termination letter to impress Julian. I was wrong, she cried out, completely ignoring the dozens of cameras now flashing around us. I didn't know. I thought you were dragging the company down. Please, Peter, if you execute the Riverfront debt foreclosure tomorrow, Sterling Group goes into immediate receivership. My father's name will be ruined. Your father's legacy died the moment you let amateur opportunists dictate your business, I said, glancing sideways at Julian, who was cowering behind 2 security guards. Mr. Blake, Lord Harrington said softly, holding open the velvet rope. The board is ready for the vote on the Sterling Group liquidation order. Peter, no? Evelyn sobbed, grabbing the brass railing as security stepped between us. Don't do this to me. I turned my back on her and began walking up the marble staircase toward the VIP suite. Execute the foreclosure at midnight, Harrington, I said without looking back, and inform the market that Rival Corp is acquiring Sterling Group's physical assets for pennies on the dollar. The heavy iron gates of the Blake estate slid open automatically as my black Rolls-Royce pulled into the cobblestone driveway. I stepped out onto the porch, holding a single leather folder, with Chloe and 2 uniformed city marshals right behind me. Before I could reach the front door, it flew open. Evelyn stepped onto the porch, her hair disheveled, still wearing the evening dress from the gala. Behind her stood Julian and 2 armed private security guards. What are you doing here, Peter? Evelyn snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. This is my family's estate. You have no right to set foot on this property. Actually, Evelyn, he has every right, the lead marshal said, stepping forward and pulling a stamped court order from his jacket. We are here to enforce an immediate eviction and asset seizure warrant issued by the Southern District Court. Eviction? Julian yelled, pushing his way past Evelyn. Are you insane? This estate belonged to Arthur Vance. Evelyn inherited it 3 years ago. You can't evict someone from their own house. I looked at Julian with deadpan amusement. Julian, Arthur didn't own this estate. He leased it from a real estate holding company called Zenith Assets. And who owns Zenith Assets? Evelyn asked, her face turning pale. I do, I said. I bought the underlying land contract 5 years ago when your father was drowning in medical bills. I paid off his $22 million line of credit, transferred the title to my private trust, and let your family live here rent-free. You're lying. Evelyn shouted, her voice breaking. My father told me the bank restructured the mortgage. Your father lied to protect your pride, Evelyn, I said, sliding a thick blue binder out of my folder and tossing it onto the patio table between us. Here are the original wire transfer records, the title deeds, and your father's signed gift release. Check the dates. July 14th, 2021. Evelyn dropped to her knees by the table, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she flipped through the pages. Page after page bore her late father's unmistakable signature alongside my personal trust stamp. No, this can't be real, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. He told me he handled it. He told me we were fine. You were fine because I made sure you were fine, I said quietly. For 7 years, every luxury you enjoyed, every bill that disappeared, every corporate debt that got quietly settled, it was all me. Julian snatched the binder from her hands, scanning the pages frantically. His face drained of color as he realized the legal absolute of the documents. Even if you own the house, Julian stammered, trying to regain his footing, the personal property inside belongs to Evelyn. The artwork, the vehicles, the financial records. Everything inside this house was bought with funds drawn from Zenith Assets' operating line. Chloe interrupted smoothly, holding up a second stack of legal notices, including the foreign bank accounts you tried to set up last week, Julian. Julian froze. What? Did you really think I wouldn't notice, Julian? I took 2 steps toward him, towering over him as he instinctively took a step back. 3 weeks ago, you initiated 4 separate wire transfers totaling $14 million from Sterling Group's offshore reserve accounts into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under your mother's maiden name. Evelyn raised her head, staring at Julian in horror. What did he just say? He's lying, Evelyn. Julian panicked, his voice rising an octave. He's trying to turn you against me. Don't listen to him. Chloe, I said. Chloe tapped her tablet, and a crystal-clear audio recording began playing over the portable speaker in her hand. Don't worry about Evelyn. Julian's recorded voice echoed clearly across the porch. She thinks I'm saving her company. Once the riverfront debt forecloses, we dump the liability on her, transfer the remaining liquid assets to the Grand Cayman account, and leave her holding the bag for the SEC. Evelyn stared at Julian as if she were seeing a monster. Julian, you did this? Evelyn, wait. It's a setup. It's AI voice cloning. Julian yelled, scrambling backward as the 2 city marshals stepped up and grabbed his arms, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Julian Vance, the lead marshal declared, reading from a card. You are under arrest for grand larceny, corporate embezzlement, and wire fraud. Evelyn, help me. Julian screamed as the marshals dragged him down the steps toward a waiting police cruiser. Call the lawyers. Evelyn. Evelyn didn't move. She sat collapsed on the stone floor, staring blankly at the driveway as the police car's siren began to wail in the distance. The security guards Julian had hired quietly unbadged themselves, set their gear on the table, and walked out the front gate without saying a single word. I walked over to the table, picked up my leather folder, and looked down at my ex-wife. He was using you from day one, Evelyn, I said, my voice completely devoid of pity. He knew Sterling was failing, and he used your arrogance to systematically strip your family's remaining wealth. Why didn't you stop him? Evelyn cried out, looking up at me with raw, bloodshot eyes. If you knew, if you owned everything, why didn't you tell me before I ruined everything? I tried to tell you, I replied calmly. On my last day in your office, I asked you if you really believed you could hold this empire together without me. You told me you built it alone, and that I was just an employee. I was wrong, she sobbed, reaching out to grab the cuff of my trousers. Peter, please. I was blind. I let him manipulate me. Take the company back. Take the house back. Just come home. Please, Peter, I'm begging you. I stepped back, letting her hand fall uselessly onto the cold stone floor. There is no home to come back to, Evelyn, I said. The marshals will give you 2 hours to pack 1 suitcase of personal clothing. After that, the locks will be changed. I turned around and walked toward the Rolls-Royce where Thomas was holding the rear door open. Peter, she screamed behind me, her voice echoing off the walls of the mansion she no longer owned. Peter, don't leave me. Please. I got into the car without turning back. Where to now, Mr. Blake? Thomas asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror as he pulled onto the main road. Sterling Group headquarters, I said, adjusting my cuffs. The board meeting starts in 20 minutes, and it's time to officially shut down the company. The conference room on the top floor of Sterling Group headquarters was pure chaos. 12 board members sat around the long glass table, shouting over one another. At the head of the table sat Arthur Vance, Evelyn's uncle and the interim board chairman, slamming his palm against the wood. Quiet. Everyone sit down. Arthur roared, his face flushed red. Evelyn is running late, but we have a quorum. The emergency motion on the floor is a debt restructuring package to stave off rival corp's foreclosure. Stave it off with what, Arthur? Senior board member Frank Vance shouted back. Julian Vance emptied $14 million from our reserve accounts before the FBI picked him up at the Blake estate 2 hours ago. City National pulled our lines of credit. We have $65 million due at midnight, or rival corp takes this building. Before Arthur could reply, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. Evelyn walked in, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, wearing a plain beige trench coat over her crumpled gala dress. She looked around the room, her voice barely above a whisper. Uncle Arthur, we don't have the money. It's over. It's not over until I say it's over. Arthur snapped. We still have the voting shares. We can force a stock dilution, raise fresh capital from secondary investors, and you can't dilute shares without the approval of the majority stakeholder. Arthur, a voice echoed from the hallway. The room fell completely dead silent. I walked into the boardroom, flanked by Chloe and 3 senior corporate attorneys from rival corporation. I carried a black leather portfolio, setting it down calmly on the empty chair right across from Arthur. Arthur stood up so fast his chair screeched against the marble floor. Peter? What the hell are you doing in a closed board meeting? Security. Get this man out of here. Security isn't coming. Arthur, Chloe said smoothly, stepping forward with a stack of legal notices. Mr. Blake personally owns 35% of Sterling Group's common stock, held through his private trust. Combined with the 51% voting control granted by the debt default terms rival corp executed an hour ago, Peter Blake holds 86% total voting authority over this board. The board members gasped in unison. Frank Vance dropped his pen, staring at me in total disbelief. 86%? Arthur stammered, looking at Evelyn. Evelyn, what is he talking about? You told us your father owned the controlling trust. Evelyn slumped into a chair at the far end of the table, burying her face in her hands. My father assigned the master equity proxy to Peter 5 years ago, Uncle Arthur. Peter has always been the controlling shareholder. You lied to us. Frank yelled at Evelyn, turning his fury toward her. You let us believe you were calling the shots while you were pushing out the one man keeping this company afloat. Enough, I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the noise like a razor. The room instantly went silent again. Every single board member sat up straight, looking at me. I didn't come here to listen to you blame each other, I said, opening my portfolio. I'm here to execute the final liquidation of Sterling Group. Arthur stepped around the table, his hands trembling as he pointed at me. Peter, please. Think about what you're doing. You spent 7 years of your life building this firm. You were family. Family. I looked Arthur dead in the eye with deadpan indifference. When Evelyn handed me my termination letter yesterday morning, not one person in this room called my phone. Not one of you stood up in the executive meeting to ask why the man who generated 80% of your revenue was being thrown out like garbage. We didn't know, Frank pleaded, standing up and holding his hands out. Julian lied to us. Evelyn convinced us you were holding the firm back. Peter, look at me. If you take over, we will vote you chairman today. We'll give you total control, double your equity, anything you want. I don't need you to give me anything, Frank, I replied. I already own it. I turned to my legal counsel. File the Chapter 7 involuntary bankruptcy petition with the federal court immediately. All corporate operations, asset transfers, and executive salaries are frozen as of right now. No. Arthur fell back into his chair, looking like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. You're destroying us. You destroyed yourselves when you traded competence for arrogance, I said. I picked up my portfolio and turned to leave. Evelyn jumped up from her seat, rushing across the room to block my path near the door. Peter, please, she sobbed, throwing all her remaining pride away in front of the entire board. Don't do this to my father's memory. I'll do anything. I'll publicly apologize. I'll step down. I'll work as your assistant. Just don't erase everything my family built. I looked down at her face, cold and unmoving. Your father's memory was built on honesty, hard work, and loyalty, Evelyn, I said. You threw all three away the day you thought you were too big to fail. Sterling Group ends today. I stepped past her, leaving her crying hysterically in the doorway as the board members began screaming at each other over their ruined fortunes. A heavy downpour pounded against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my corner office at Rival Corp. Chloe stood by my desk, placing a steaming cup of black coffee next to a finalized stack of acquisition documents. The federal court officially approved the Chapter 7 liquidation 3 hours ago, boss, Chloe reported. Sterling Group is legally defunct. Rival Corp took possession of all secondary assets, intellectual property, and real estate portfolio at 40 cents on the dollar. And Arthur Vance? I asked, taking a slow sip of coffee. He signed over his personal guarantees to cover his legal fees, Chloe said. He's completely broke. The board members are currently suing each other in bankruptcy court to salvage whatever personal assets they have left. She hesitated for a second, looking toward the window. Evelyn has been standing down by the main entrance for 4 hours, Peter. It's pouring rain. Security offered to call her an Uber, but she refuses to move. She says she won't leave until she speaks with you. I looked down at the street 60 stories below. A solitary figure in a soaked coat stood near the revolving glass doors, completely ignored by the commuters rushing past. Tell security to let her up, I said flatly. Just her. 5 minutes later, the elevator doors hissed open. Evelyn walked into my office. Her beige coat was drenched, clinging to her shivering frame, and her dark hair was plastered against her pale face. The proud, untouchable CEO who had dismissed me 4 days ago was completely gone. In her place stood a broken woman who had lost everything. She stopped 10 feet from my desk, clutching her soaked handbag to her chest. You let me up, she said, her voice hoarse and trembling from the cold. You were making a scene on company property, I replied without looking up from my tablet. You have 2 minutes, Evelyn. What do you want? Evelyn took 2 steps forward, her lips trembling. I came to apologize, Peter. Not as a CEO, not as a business partner, but as your wife. Ex-wife, I corrected her coldly. Tears welled in her eyes, mixing with the rainwater on her cheeks. I didn't see it, Peter. I was so consumed by my father's legacy, so terrified of failing, that I let my pride blind me. When Julian came along, telling me everything I wanted to hear, I thought he was the answer. I didn't realize he was pulling me into a pit. Julian didn't sign my termination letter, Evelyn, I said, setting my tablet down and looking her dead in the eye. You did. You held the pen. You looked me in the eye and told me my skills were obsolete. I was stupid, she cried out, taking a desperate step closer and dropping to her knees right in front of my desk. I was an arrogant, foolish hypocrite. I thought I was the one protecting you, but you were the one holding up my entire sky for 7 years. She reached out, wrapping her trembling, ice-cold hands over mine. I was wrong, Peter, she sobbed hysterically. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, give me one more chance. We can start over. I don't care about Sterling Group. I don't care about money. I don't care about titles. I just want my husband back. I'll do anything. I'll beg on my knees every day for the rest of my life, if that's what it takes. I looked down at her hands on mine. 5 years ago, I would have burned the world down to keep those hands warm. But now, as I looked into her desperate, tear-filled eyes, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no resentment, no lingering affection. Just a cold, hollow silence. I slowly pulled my hands out of her grip. I used to think you were the center of my universe, Evelyn, I said quietly, my voice ringing clear in the silent office. I gave you 7 years of my life, my talent, and my protection. I gave you the stars, but you complained they were too bright. So I took them back. Evelyn's breath hitched, as if she had been punched in the chest. Peter, please. You don't miss me. Evelyn, I said, standing up and looking down at her. You missed the safety net I provided. You missed the deals I closed, the debts I erased, and the life I built for you while letting you take the credit. You don't love me. You love the comfort I gave you. That's not true, she screamed, tears streaming down her face. I love you. I've always loved you. If you loved me, you wouldn't have humiliated me in front of the entire company to impress a con man, I said. I tapped the intercom on my desk. Chloe, send security to escort Ms. Vance out of the building. Peter, no, don't do this. Evelyn scrambled up from the floor, trying to grab my suit jacket, but I stepped cleanly out of her reach. Don't discard me like this. I'm not discarding you, Evelyn, I said, stepping toward the floor-to-ceiling window to gaze out at the city skyline. I'm just closing a bad investment. The door opened, and 2 uniformed rival corp security guards stepped inside, flanking Evelyn. Ms. Vance, please follow us, the lead guard said firmly, holding the door open. Evelyn stared at my back, her chest heaving as silent, bitter sobs shook her body. She knew it was over. There were no more cards to play, no more leverage to use, and no second chances left. You'll regret this, Peter, she whispered, her voice cracking in total despair. You'll realize no one will ever love you like I did. Nobody needs to, Evelyn, I said without turning around. I rule the market now. The security guards gently ushered her out of the room, and the heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the absolute quiet of my empire. The main auditorium of the New York Stock Exchange was packed to capacity. Cameras flashed relentlessly across the floor as financial reporters, global banking executives, and market analysts gathered for the opening bell of the Blake Global Syndicate's official public listing. I stood on the podium overlooking the floor, adjusting my cufflinks. Beside me stood Marcus Thorne, holding a glass of sparkling water, along with Chloe, who was holding the real-time trading tablet. Sterling's remaining real estate portfolio was completely integrated into Rival Corp this morning, Marcus said over the roar of the crowd. Market cap projections for the merged entity just breached $200 billion. And Evelyn? I asked casually, keeping my eyes on the digital ticker tape scrolling above the crowd. She signed a lease on a studio apartment in Queens yesterday, Chloe replied, checking her screen. Her personal bankruptcy discharge left her with just enough to cover basic living expenses. She took a job as a junior paralegal at a mid-sized civil firm. Nobody in the top tier will take her calls. What about Julian? Sentence was handed down an hour ago, Chloe said. 12 years at a federal corrections facility in Pennsylvania for grand larceny and wire fraud, with no parole eligibility for the first 8 years. I gave a single, satisfied nod. The chapter was closed. At precisely 9:29 a.m., the doors at the back of the VIP balcony opened. Lord Harrington walked up to the podium, accompanied by 4 representatives from international central banks. Harrington stepped up to the podium microphone, raising a hand to quiet the buzzing crowd below. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrington's voice echoed throughout the hall. 7 years ago, the global financial market lost its most brilliant operative when Peter Blake stepped into the shadows. Today, the board of the Blake Global Syndicate formally announces his full return as chairman and chief executive officer. The floor erupted into thunderous applause. Wall Street institutional traders on the floor raised their hands in celebration, cheering for the man whose algorithmic trading strategies and corporate restructuring models had quietly dictated market trends for a decade. Harrington stepped aside and handed me the heavy brass mallet used to strike the opening bell. The floor is yours, Mr. Blake, Harrington said, stepping back with a respectful bow. I walked up to the podium microphone, looking down at the sea of financial titans, press reporters, and global investors staring up at me. 7 years ago, I was told that in business, loyalty is a liability and sentimentality is a weakness. I said clearly into the microphone, my voice carrying into millions of homes via live broadcast. I spent 7 years letting others take credit for my work, believing that humility would be rewarded with respect. I was wrong. The auditorium fell silent as every eye remained fixed on me. Respect isn't given in this market. I continued smoothly. It is seized. From this day forward, the Blake Global Syndicate will no longer operate from the background. We set the terms, we dictate the market, and we decide who rises and who falls. I raised the brass mallet and struck the opening bell at exactly 9:30 a.m. A loud chime reverberated through the hall, signaling the start of trading. Within seconds, the massive digital displays flashed bright green. The stock price of the Blake Global Syndicate surged 22% in the first 3 minutes of trading, shattering historical Wall Street records. Marcus leaned over, a wide smile on his face. You just added $40 billion to your personal net worth in 3 minutes, Peter. It was never about the money, Marcus, I said, handing the mallet back to the podium manager. It was about setting the record straight. As we walked down the back steps of the podium toward the private executive lounge, Chloe handed me her tablet, displaying a breaking news broadcast. The screen showed a small, crowded break room in a legal office in Queens. Sitting on a worn folding chair, staring at a small television mounted on the wall, was Evelyn. Tears streamed quietly down her face as she watched me on screen, surrounded by world leaders and financial moguls. She was watching the man she had called a worthless failure 4 days ago stand at the absolute pinnacle of global power. I looked at the screen for a fraction of a second, then reached out and turned the tablet off. Get the private jet ready, Chloe, I commanded as Thomas opened the heavy oak doors of the executive suite for me. We have a board meeting in London at 6. Right away, Chairman, Chloe said, stepping ahead to coordinate with the flight crew. I stepped through the doors, stepping cleanly into the future I had built with my own hands, a future where no one would ever doubt my name again.